It's probably hard for anyone who wasn't already a teenager or older in the 1980s to imagine how the threat of nuclear war hung over us. The fear that the then USSR and the US were only a hop, skip and a jump from pushing buttons was palpable at times. I remember it well, and I wasn't surprised several years ago as documents were released that showed that there was 10 days in November 1983 when the United States and the Soviet Union nearly started a nuclear war. Documents from the CIA, NSA, KGB and senior officials in both countries revealed just how close we came to mutually assured destruction, really, over a military exercise which was called Able Archer 83. And it simulated the transition by NATO from a conventional war to a nuclear war, and it culminated in the simulated release of warheads against the Soviet Union. So that was happening in the early 1980s. What was also happening at this time was an enormous pressure on South Africa to end apartheid. As a young journalist, I attended the 1986 Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in London with Prime Minister Bob Hawke. This was a special meeting held in between the biennial CHOGMs in order to consider the recommendations of the Commonwealth Eminent Persons Group regarding economic sanctions against South Africa. And British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher refused to support mandatory sanctions, and it resulted in a very acrimonious meeting and quite an extraordinary event for a young journalist to be covering, especially with Australia leading the charge in support of sanctions, which were ultimately agreed to a year later. So that was the context in the 80s in which South Africa was making its own decision to create nuclear weapons. Much occurred in the short intervening years, and by 1989, President F.W. de Klerk decided to terminate the program. They'd had 6 weapons by that stage. And this is the only instance in history when a nuclear power has voluntarily renounced nuclear weapons. This is the 30th anniversary of that decision coming up in July, and it's one we can be very grateful for. It brings us to where we are now. The world has enforced multiple treaties, but from this year, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, not signed by Australia. The ambition for a world free of nuclear weapons is one that Labor shares. I know it's an ambition that the students at Kindle Hill in Wentworth Falls share too, and I've been pleased to support their call to the government to sign the treaty. Labor's committed to signing and ratifying the treaty, obviously after taking account the necessary things like effective verification and enforcement architecture, and also working to achieve universal support on it. But right now, you have to ask yourself what progress is being made, and what role are we, as a country that is known to be able to help broker complex world negotiations, as we did in the 80s around South Africa, what role are we playing in the progress now? I think not a lot is probably the best way to describe it at this moment. The things that have been interesting to see recently is that we have North Korea very active. We have the US, Joe Biden running on a platform opposing nuclear weapons, but I've seen commentary that his first defence budget actually backs 2 controversial projects put in motion by former President Donald Trump. We obviously have Russia openly developing new tactical weapons, so I hope it's progress to see the meeting between President Joe Biden and Russian President Vladimir Putin in Geneva recently as a welcome change in the tense relationship that has existed between those 2 countries. The summit saw the leaders discussing a range of issues, including nuclear weapons and arms control. The future of global nuclear non-proliferation order is really dependent in a lot of ways upon the commitment from both the US and Russia to work towards building agreements and collaborating on the limit, and I would hope the end, of nuclear weapons. Both nations possess over 90% of the world's nuclear weapons. So for Australia, the big question is, what is our role? Australia can and should lead international efforts to rid the world of nuclear weapons, and we can do that by calling on all states that possess nuclear weapons to take measures to lower the chance of a nuclear war. That's something we can be doing.